let stand by. Essentially, within Stimson, the sponsors are allowed to hire within the ranks of the hall. This is a tradition that's come from many, many years before Residence Life was even at the university, and it's something that sets Stimson apart. But that system was changed by the hall director, and I couldn't sit by and let that happen, even as just a regular student last year. I wasn't on staff, but I had to raise concerns, and I do believe because of that, I was not rehired to the building. But several of my closest friends were also really affected by this. One was fired over him sharing his religious beliefs, and was told he was fired because he didn't hang up posters within the hall. One was fired for two were fired for not sharing the same opinion as the hall director on issues. They brought up concerns about the way the building was being run. They brought up issues that they saw. They brought up changes in tradition. And they were just airing grievances. They were just saying what they thought. And within 6 weeks of that happening, they had hundreds of allegations raised against them. Anything from being labeled a racist to saying they breached confidentiality. All of this from when previously they had sterling records. And because of that, they were fired instantly. Residence Life in these scenarios did not even follow the way their contract is laid out. There's a 3-step process towards termination. First is a verbal warning, second is a probationary period, and third is termination. They did not follow that at all. They went straight from nothing to termination. And that is something they outline in training as not something they do, except in the most extreme scenarios. And that happened 3 times within the past few years.
Do you have any gut feeling about what is at the core of all these different situations? Do you think it's a group of friends, or do you think that this is a kind of an ulterior motive?
Honestly, there are several things that I really feel like are behind this, but I'd have to speculate. If I were to speculate, there are significant problems within the Department of Residence Life of both nepotism and problems of seeing what's really happening. The hall director at Stimson was hired mid-semester 2 years ago, or halfway through the year 2 years ago, because the former hall director wanted to leave to pursue a new career. He was hired by a friend of his who they previously worked together at the University of Oregon. And because of this, his boss, the assistant director of Residence Life, essentially took his word on everything that happened within the building. This happens with frequency around Residence Life. The word of the hall director is what goes. If you're a paraprofessional and you say something differently from the hall director, they almost always take the hall director's side. And this is why the resolution before the Senate asks for an appeals process. Because if students that are terminated could go to a body of their peers or to a board before the student conduct committee, then they could explain their side of the story and they could get an accurate opinion that's being made. Then we know that there's been due process. Another concern of mine, and this is, like I said, purely speculation, but is the gut feeling, is that Stimson is probably the closest thing to a fraternity on campus. And it's been looked upon as very negatively because of that. But, as I mentioned in my speech to the Senate, Stimson has had one of the strongest governments on campus consistently. Consistent participation in hall government, consistent participation in hall programs, and students that continually come back to live in the building. If things hadn't changed, I would be living in my 4th year in the building this year. There are many students that lived all 4 years in Stimson because that's how good of a community is built there. And that comes from the fact that there are more sponsors, there are smaller sponsors to resident ratios than in other buildings, and because the sponsors that are hired from Stimson. They know the traditions, they know what it means to live in Stimson, and that's a big deal. And it is very similar to a fraternity in some ways. There are many people within the Department of Residence Life that hate the fraternity and sorority system. And because of that, I do believe they had a vendetta out for Stimson Hall and decided to do all they could to take apart the system as it is. The paraprofessionals in Stimson now, there's only 5 of them. They have a meal plan and and housing paid for, they're essentially just RAs. And the sponsor system as it was taken apart.
Can you speak on behalf of any other residence halls that might be experiencing the same thing? Do you know if this issue is going on all around campus or just in Stimson?
There are other issues that have occurred. I'd say Stimson has seen the most grievous of issues arise. But there have been scenarios where students have been fired for various reasons. I can't speak to all of them because honestly, a lot of students I've talked to don't want their stories shared. There were several people that we talked to and were hoping to get testimony for this Senate meeting who were afraid to say what happened exactly. But there are issues where students have lived on couches for the rest of the semester. They've been out of housing and in financial trouble because of this. And there have been students that have had to leave the university. And this is happening all around campus. The reason it's come to such a climax in Stimson is because it happened with such frequency. There were individual instances around campus, but because it happened, so many happened at once, and so many people were affected in Stimson. I think that's why it's finally come to a head.
You spoke a little bit about the culture of fear. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
I think it stems primarily from the fact that, like I said, your entire livelihood is tied to your position as a paraprofessional. Your housing, your food, and in many ways your finances are tied to your position as a paraprofessional. For a lot of students, they pursue RA positions because otherwise they would not be able to afford housing at the university. And that's a good thing that this system exists for them to pursue those positions. But their livelihoods cannot be tied to their jobs. In no other industry in the United States is that the case. And so if you're so afraid to say anything that might jeopardize your position because you have no other way to live, you have no other way to be at the university, then you're not going to speak up. And I think that persists beyond their leaving the Department of Residence Life. There are a lot of people that I worked with who were RAs in other buildings when I was a sponsor that still are a bit afraid of the Department of Residence Life. There's very far-reaching consequences, and there's ties to every other part of the university as well. The Department of Residence Life is very close to the Dean of Students' office and the Vice President of Student Affairs and Enrollment. And because of that, there are implications that could arise beyond residence life. And if you're so afraid of something when you're in the system, that's not going to go away easily.
Have any of the former RAs or sponsors similar to you who have experienced the same thing gone to the Dean of Students or Student Council or any of the different authorities? Last
year there were a lot of students that went to both the Dean of Students, the Director of the Department of Residence Life, and attempted to reach out to Vice President John Friday. Obviously he's very busy with other things as well, so it was difficult to get meetings there, but there was constant contact being made to ask for a further investigation, ask why they were fired. And for a lot of things, there were a couple of people who were fired last year in Stimson that just wanted to have the trespass ban raised. They just wanted to be able to go back to the hall and see their friends. They didn't even care anymore about the fact that they were fired. They just wanted to be able to go back to the hall. And there was nothing done that came from that. The Department of Residence Life says that they will always be willing to talk to you, they'll always be willing to reach out to you and have conversations about this. But with persistence, there were students, not even even just regular students in Stimson that were reaching out to the higher-ups in Residence Life and could not get meetings, could not get anything to happen. And it was really a failing on behalf of the administration, in my opinion.
So what is your proposal to fix the problem? What do you see being the big necessary points that need to be fixed in order for this to change?
Well, I'm supporting this resolution because there are several things within the resolution that address many of these concerns. First of all, putting in an appeals process. As I said before, putting in an appeals process would really change things, would allow students to air their side of the story, and would allow a more fair determination of the termination process. Secondly, it would encourage the department to share the contract with prospective RAs earlier in the process. A lot of times, RAs only see the contract they're about to sign on the day that they sign it. And that's not the way a system should run either. That should be something that's gone over on the first day of the RA training class. And that's not what happens right now. And another thing that's a very big deal within the resolution is that it encourages the department to follow that three-step process towards termination that I outlined earlier. It encourages them to stop going immediately to termination and to put people on probation, to give them verbal warnings before it's sent directly to termination. And all of those things would constitute a significant change in the way things are run.
How would you feel if this passes?
If this passes, I'd feel pretty ecstatic. I mean, if we see the ASWSU Senate putting effort towards making something happen, then that's a big step in the right direction. A lot of what we saw happen last semester was attempts to make changes and nothing coming as a result. This is the first step where we've really seen possible progress, and it's very exciting. If the Department of Residence Life now responds to this, then that's going to be really showing that the process works.
And you can tell them what the most frustrating thing about. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what the most frustrating thing for you, like one sentence most frustrating thing about the entire situation would be?
I'd say the most frustrating part is that the repeated denials to put forward an investigation was what happened. There were a lot of requests to make that exact thing happen, just to investigate the process, not to overturn determinations, but to investigate why it happened. And that never came to fruition.
And then, do you think anything will come of like an investigation that come out of this if this gets passed?
I think it's past the time for investigation. I think that most of the people who have been fired unjustly, in my opinion, but they're long gone from the university. Some have graduated, some are just out of the system entirely. But I think that the best part that would come from this would be changes in the contract for future employees.
Perfect. So you think you're kind of a voice for the RAs in a way?
I'd like to think so. I'm out of the system, and I've had experience in ASWSU, so I know how to run, how things run here. So that's been helpful for me. But I also, well, I'm still a little afraid of what might come from the Department of Residence Life. I'm afraid they might try and come after me a little bit, but I'm more than willing to stand up and say something about this, because something needs to be said.
Perfect. Well, that last quote was perfect. That's exactly what I was kind of looking for.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Excellent.
much. You're going to be in here after during the rest.